Good morning.
Hello.
Hey, everybody. Sorry, excuse me, I'm eating my lunch, that's why I'm gonna keep turning off my camera periodically. Welcome, everyone. As a reminder, please register attendance in the meeting notes, which I just sent in the chat. We would welcome newcomers, but there's no newcomers here. If you have any agenda items, please go ahead and add them. I put one discussion topic. Is David here? Looks like David is not here. A topic that David Wheeler brought up in a pull request that I think is worth briefly discussing. It's low priorities. If you have anything else, feel free to preempt that. The only two topics I had were one, I think if you could review the proposal 829, 832 to mark V1 as approved, and if you do agree with that, then please mark your approval on GitHub. And then 832 makes V1 the default, which we'll submit after the two. I separate them just because technically they're two distinct actions. We could have the approved thing show up by default. And so, sorry, yes, it's in the meeting notes, 829 and 832. If you go to just the GitHub open pull requests, you'll see them. Mark V1 as approved and make V1 the default. And so I think we could use that as the means to register that it has general community approval. So far, we haven't heard, to my knowledge, any significant feedback that would prevent us from considering it approved. And I think according to our governance, the process is that the maintainers approve it, assuming that, like, with the intention that it represents a consensus of the community. And so I don't think we need like specifically formal approvals or every single steering committee member to approve, although I think that would be helpful. That would be nice to just record. So that, and then we'll merge it tomorrow afternoon, and then the PR emails go out Wednesday morning, I think 9 a.m. Eastern. Anything on that topic?
No, I think we should have a formal, decision made on this meeting that this is the plan. So we can, document it, say, yeah, everybody agreed. In addition to the GitHub process.
Sure. What process do you want to use?
In particular, I think, so we should acknowledge that there were no major issues raised in the last 2 weeks, right? So we are good to go with the plan to move the specification from basically release candidate towards the candidate approve specification to approve specification under the committee license framework. You're on mute now, Mo. So I've seen several people nodding their head when I was saying that, but
I approve and I agree with what you just said.
thank you.
Oh, yeah.
So if anybody has any concerns, this is the time to raise it, basically. Otherwise, we should, record that this was approved at this meeting, at least.
Sounds good. Thanks, Aaron. Does that sound sufficient to you? All right, thank you. Okay, so that's great. Thank you very much. Anything more on the 1.0? Last minute topic. Okay. The only thing I had currently is that I thought was worth a brief discussion is the terminology. I sent out a pull request to update the diagram. Let me present it here. Try to zoom in. Sorry, the GitHub doesn't make it easy to zoom, but hopefully you can see. Basically change developer to producer, that's the only change. We had an earlier pull request that went through and eliminated, basically has a single term producer for everything. Like we have producer and consumer, and whenever we need a word, we default to producer. And when we want to be more specific, we kind of spell that out in plain English. Like there's cases where we say, where we had maintainer and we replaced with insider or threat or individual if we're trying to emphasize that it's a person instead of an organization. And I think we didn't really need the word developer or maintainer because we only have the build track and it doesn't really come up. Or where it does, we could just easily spell it out. But I think David might, he's unfortunately not here, but he might have some larger concerns, which I asked him in the pull request. So I guess one question is, I guess just to confirm, like, does that sound good to folks? This isn't a blocker for 1.0, by the way. It's just, I think we could easily swap terms. And then also for this particular diagram, I kind of feel like developer looks better here because like the developer is the one who goes into the source versus producers kind of implies an organization and kind of implies touching all the different parts. But my weak feeling, I like weakly lean toward just having a single consistent term instead of having the word developer only in this diagram, but nowhere else in the site. So I just wanted to open that up because I thought David's comments were worth quickly discussing. Yeah, Trishank.
Yeah, at first I wasn't crazy about producer. It seems a bit too abstract, but now in the age of LLMs and everything, even Dependabot, producer actually makes sense. That's just my 2 cents here.
Yeah, so I agree with that. And if you look at the terminology now, we have defined different roles and we have producer. And it actually says that, it can be a maintainer or a software vendor. So it's, it's kind of like an organization possibly, and it goes, the same line of, maybe developers to reduce it anyways. So I think it's, I'm happy to go with producer. This would have been using in the spec for a while now. And I think we should keep it that way. So I agree with the updates to the diagram.
Yeah, I also agree. If we don't really list a developer anywhere else in our terminology, I think it makes sense to kind of align this diagram especially, right? Because this is where people are looking at. So I think that makes total sense. The other quick question, I didn't look at the other images. Are there other ones? Because isn't there another image where there's a bunch of listings of vulnerabilities along the supply chain as well, or is that a different thing? Okay, here we go. Good. Excellent.
Yeah, this updates all of the, in the pull request description, I didn't update the ones that are only visible in v0.1 and the released candidate. And so there's a little bit of an inconsistency there, but yeah. If you just look at 1.0, it is consistently now all this, assuming that we approve and merge this pull request.
I like it.
Nicole?
I put the note in the PR, but I feel like I prefer the consistency, but it's not like a strong feeling. But I think we should link to the terminology page at the bottom of all the diagrams where we use terminology, because it includes like examples and definitions. And so that could be helpful to people who are just coming into it and they're like, what is this?
That's a good idea. Okay, so, all right, so I couldn't quite tell from folks. It sounds like the weak preference is to switch to producer, not that people particularly like producer, but rather it's consistent with what we use elsewhere. And so the consistency is a clear gain. And maybe there's still a question of perhaps there's a better word that we could use other than producer, but that's a larger discussion. Does that capture?
Yeah, except that I don't think switching to producer is the right, is the right thing to say here, because the switch has already been made in the spec, right? Aligning the diagram to the text part of the spec to me is not, doesn't constitute a switch. But yeah, I think we should continue on switching to the producer, and align the diagrams with the spec, with the text.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. Yeah, I think David kind of questioned the choice of switching to producer.
Yeah.
But
and I think his comment was broader than the diagram, as you pointed out in the pull request, right? It was just, so.
Yeah. I think like looking at, like, for example, other, for the bro, okay, so it sounds like this one, fine. If you have comments on the pull request, please do add them, say by end of day. But it sounds, for the broader question of like, is producer the best word for that? SBOM calls it, what do they call it? Supplier, which I think maps to what we call producer, although I don't know if there's like some sort of subtle difference. That might be one thing to consider, of like having a consistency across, so people don't say, like if we really do mean the same thing. Yeah, I don't like the word supplier either, for what it's worth. But it does kind of call into question of like, well, if SLSA says producer and SBOM says supplier, are they the same? Are they different? If we literally use the same word and say it's the same thing, then it doesn't. Yeah, I don't think supplier is a very good name. Yeah.
Don't let the SBOM people listen to this recording.
I think that term is pretty entrenched in SBOM. I think it also kind of comes in, like if you think about a manufacturing pipeline, there's kind of like a supplier and a distributor. I don't think SBOM talks about distributor, but like, I think the terms kind of come from the manufacturing world where, like there's actually, I'm not sure, someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like supplier is like the end entity of like who's saying how to assemble all the things, and the individual parts can come from other suppliers. And then there's some manufacturer that converts all those parts into a widget or something, and then a distributor, which I think we would call package ecosystem, that like then sends it out. But yeah, okay. So it sounds like there's not any particular groundswell of support in terms of changing this term. Okay. All right, sounds good. SBOM uses supplier, but
I spoke too soon because Melba was commenting that they use manufacturer, which to me, I mean, I was just trying to say that from a supplier where you might not be trying to differentiate as much between the different entities involved in the process of building artifacts, it might make more sense to use a supplier. But supplier and manufacturer, that still seems to roughly correspond to producer and platform.
Yeah, I was just clearly stating that that's what the SBOM requires. That's all. I wasn't advocating for using that.
it might be worth like briefly, especially if we had the other open pull request about the SBOM frequent asked question. We could mention that there of like, in case you're wondering these two terms or somewhere, but I'm not sure if any people really have that question. I guess we could wait until someone actually has a question before adding it to a frequently asked question.
Which
And we would have to be confident that what we say is correct, which I'm not sure we have the expertise to say that right there.
so I think that was one thing mentioned in actually 827 is like we don't want to be wrong, and SBOM is actively, iterating as much as we are. So it's probably better to link to them than it is to restate or quote anything of theirs.
Okay, thanks for discussing. Anything else on the topic or any other agenda items?
I mean, do we want to like briefly go over the SBOM issue so people can take a look at it?
Sure.
I guess I'll attempt to give a TLDR.
Sure.
So in 827, there's a proposal for how do we reference that SBOM and SLSA currently are different, even though like in the future they're kind of potentially going to have a lot of overlap. And so there's a proposal in there for how we reference it. I like the revision on it. I do think I might make a couple comments though about us not over defining things and kind of just pointing at them. But I guess if anybody else has any thoughts on that, it would probably be good to comment in there once you get to read it.
Yeah, thanks for raising this issue. Now on the second, at first I thought maybe we could say something slightly more prescriptive, but I think I like the way it's worded now, because part of what I'm worried about is there might be an accidental bifurcation. Do I make sense? Some people might put SBOMs in their SLSA attestation. Some people might use SBOMs instead of SLSA attestations. I'm kind of worried about the divergence there, but maybe it's too early, and we probably don't want to be prescriptive here either. Any thoughts on this?
So first, a little bit, as Nico was saying earlier, I mean, I think there's a danger in trying to characterize what SBOMs are when we are not the SBOM, experts or owners, so to speak, because I think our view is going to be slightly biased in some ways, and we have to be very careful. That's why I was, one of my first comments was trying to be broad enough that people would not be offended that we seem to corner them in this small niche that they may not feel like this is where they honestly they want to be in, and especially given the amount of development there is that we already know about. So that's mostly what I would like us to keep working on, is trying to make sure that the way we frame things is broad enough that nobody feels offended by the way we portray things, and that we also make it open enough in terms of how things can evolve, which I think there's been some effort to try and do that for sure.
Yeah, I don't think I fully captured that in the notes. So if anyone could continue typing, that would be good. Yeah, if you look at the pull request, my comment from 4 days ago on the 13th at 5 p.m., starting with what do you think about the following? One approach could be, instead of talking about like the difference between salsa/provenance and SBOM, could be just be talking about like, why doesn't salsa say anything about SBOM, which is a little bit like, we could be more authoritative there, because we're just explaining the reasoning as opposed to saying something is true. And so if you could look at that and see if you want to incorporate any of that concepts into the pull request, that would be good too. Basically, I broke it down into why don't we require SBOM, and the short answer is we kind of say precisely what we try to spell out the necessary things without using the term SBOM, because SBOM is kind of ambiguous at the moment, and saying SBOM is not a good match for the specific things that we're trying to do. And then why does salsa like invent a new format instead of using existing SBOM format? And that has more of a simple answer of like, we can't. With the formats that are available today, none of them can express salsa provenance. There's ones coming down the road, but they don't exist, and so for now. So yeah, anyway, feedback and say, Andrew.
Yeah, I haven't read the PR, so I can't speak to the PR specifically, but based on the conversation around it, I feel like this actually, or in my head, that this relates to the same confusion around provenance versus attestation. So if you look at the attestation model that is published, the provenance and SPDX and et cetera are just are different predicates. And so like, to me, stating that you can have multiple predicates in one envelope, you can have multiple predicates being attested with a single signature. And so it might be relevant to have multiple predicates there in a single envelope if you are concerned about the specific provenance, maybe what is defined in the provenance V1 specification. If you are concerned about specific bombs, then that could be another predicate. And so I don't know if it would clarify the situation at all if we were trying to be more precise about what it means to have an attestation. Is an attestation, because we've kind of loosely said that provenance is attestation, but it is an attestation, but it's not a signed attestation according to the attestation model. It is an in toto attestation, but not the entire attestation envelope. And so maybe if we can poke at that a little bit or pull it apart a little bit, it might make more sense.
Yeah, I mean, regarding SBOM, it seems like, I don't know, but I get the impression that when people say, like, there's a lot of stuff that are rolled into SBOM, and it's kind of both, it's like simultaneously a particular format, and people often has a notion of a minimum set of data that should be in the thing, and also particularly use cases that will be solved by having that data. And so kind of any more specificity that we could have is probably helpful.
I might be missing something, but is there a way to include SBOM metadata right now in provenance attestations?
Yes, there is you could either create it as an output file, put it in the subject, or you could put it in the byproducts. There's an open issue to document that. It's probably like a equivalent of like a one-line change. Just haven't gotten around to it. Yeah,
Oh, I like it. I like it. That I think that would go a long way to its clarifying this.
Because Mark, when you say just put it as a subject, right? So that's just another attestation of a artifact, right? And it's just the SHA of that, right? The file itself, the SBOM, right?
Yeah, so it would, if it's in the subject, it would effectively say, well, either way, it would effectively say that this build process resulted in this.
Right.
build
It's SBOM, and just any arbitrary file essentially. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And that should be, I mean, that's a pretty easy fix. Like, it is just putting somewhere in the provenance format saying, you know, many users probably want to have this field, something like that. Okay. So review on those where comments would be welcome. Any more things to discuss, or should we break now?
I have a very small one, right? So I threw this issue up 821. Don't intend to have a discussion on it today, but just want to bring awareness. If anyone is interested in etiquette of merge requests or pull requests and helping to document that, that'd be really nice. I know Josh and Mark have already, and Arno also, you guys already contributed to the issue, so thank you. So just like, kind of interesting, right? Because my experience, I'm like, all right, I got this one approval. When do I merge into main, right? Because I could just press the button, but what's the etiquette to that? So it'd be nice for us as a community to kind of high level document that and then contributing probably. So you guys already have done a lot of discussion, which is great. And Josh talked about conventional commits, which seems kind of interesting. I'll have to read up on that. So I'm just bringing awareness. We don't have to talk about it in here, but
Sounds good. Yeah, I already put my comments on there. I think it would be great to have and document and start making progress towards. And feel free to also as always, feel free to disagree with anything I said. I won't take offense. Thanks, Aaron. Anything else? Okay, doke. All right, good seeing everyone, and I'll talk to you on through other asynchronous means. Bye, everyone.